Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be talking all about arsenic today.
Yeah.
And I bet you think you know a lot about arsenic.
Hmm.
It's infamous for its toxicity, of course,
Right.
but the stack of sources that you sent me reveals
Yeah.
a much more complex story than I think a lot of people realize.
Mm.
We're going to touch on its history as a poison and a medicine.
Right.
It's present in our everyday lives. We'll talk about that.
Uh-huh.
And there are even some hints that it might have some benefits.
Absolutely.
So arsenic has been both a tool and a threat throughout history.
Oh, yeah. Right.
For centuries, it was the go-to poison.
Yeah.
It even earned that nickname, the poison of kings.
Wow.
And the thing is, it was odorless and tasteless
Oh, so you couldn't detect it?
and incredibly effective.
Oh.
So it really was the perfect weapon
Mhm.
if you wanted to eliminate your rivals discreetly.
It really does sound like something straight out of a history book or a mystery novel.
It really does.
I mean, were the rumors true about families like the Borgias?
And the Medicis using arsenic to get rid of people and kind of maintain their power.
Well, it's hard to say for certain. I mean, we don't have, modern forensic techniques to go back and look at.
Right.
But the historical accounts definitely suggest that arsenic played a role in shaping the destinies of a lot of powerful people. And the thing is that its symptoms mimic those of common illnesses. So
it'd be hard to know.
it was really difficult to detect back then until the March test was developed. That was in 1832. It was a real breakthrough in forensic science.
Wow.
And it gave investigators a reliable way to detect arsenic. So it kind of took away its perfect poison status.
So the reign of terror of arsenic as an undetectable poison came to an end.
Pretty much, yeah.
But what's really wild is that arsenic wasn't just a weapon, it was also used as a medicine.
Yeah, that's a bit of a paradox. It is.
How did they even figure that out? Like, how did people figure out it had therapeutic properties alongside its deadly ones?
Yeah, it does seem like playing with fire a little bit.
It does.
But you know what? There's evidence that suggests that arsenic has been used to treat ailments for millennia.
Really?
Even Hippocrates,
Wow.
who's considered the father of medicine,
Right.
he used arsenic paste to treat ulcers.
Wow.
And then later, in the 18th century, they had this concoction. It was called Fowler's solution. It was a potassium arsenite.
Okay.
And it was used for a whole range of things, from malaria and syphilis to skin disorders.
Huh.
And then in the early 1900s, there was Selversan.
Okay.
That was an arsenic-based drug.
Yeah.
And it was hailed as the magic bullet for syphilis
Oh, wow.
until penicillin came along.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So it really did go from poison to potion.
It did.
A pretty big identity crisis.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine now.
I know. So are there any modern day applications?
Yeah. Even today, arsenic trioxide, it's used as a chemotherapy agent for acute promyelocytic leukemia. And research is ongoing to look into its potential.
To see if it could.
To treat other cancers as
Okay.
well. It's pretty incredible to think that something can be such a potent killer
Yeah.
and a potential lifesaver.
It certainly makes you wonder what other secrets arsenic might be hiding.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about, intentional uses, both bad and good.
Right.
But the sources you sent me also talk about how we can be exposed to arsenic in our everyday lives.
Right.
Should we be worried about that?
Well, thankfully, intentional poisoning is rare these days.
Right.
But arsenic is naturally present in our environment.
So it's just out there.
It's everywhere. You find it in drinking water, food, soil,
Wow.
even the air we breathe.
Really?
And the levels vary a lot, depending on the location and the source.
Oh, okay.
It's not necessarily a cause for widespread panic, but there are certain regions, particularly those with high arsenic in their groundwater, that really need to be mindful of the potential health risks.
Okay, so it sounds like arsenic is lurking in more places than we realize.
It is. It really is.
Does that mean we're all ingesting it to some degree?
To some extent, yeah.
Wow.
Even something as seemingly harmless as seafood can be a major contributor of arsenic, though mostly it's in less harmful organic forms.
Okay.
But this raises a really interesting question that scientists have been grappling with. Could arsenic, in minute amounts, actually be an essential nutrient?
An essential poison.
Ah,
Now, that's a wild thought.
it is.
But, okay, if we're constantly exposed to arsenic, like you're saying,
Yeah.
what happens to it once it gets in our body?
Well, our bodies are pretty adaptable, and they've developed this process called Challenger's scheme
Okay.
to deal with it.
Oh, so it's got a way to...
To deal with arsenic.
Okay.
Basically, it reduces and methylates the arsenic. It converts it into different forms that make it easier to get rid of.
So our bodies are like arsenic processing plants.
Pretty much.
Can you break down that process a little more for us?
Sure. So it all starts with this enzyme, AS3MT.
Okay.
It plays a key role in the methylation process.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Variations in this enzyme
Okay.
can affect how efficiently we each metabolize arsenic. And these variations can be influenced by our genes.
Oh, okay.
And even by environmental factors like selenium levels. And to make things even more complex, recent research is showing that the gut microbiome, all those bacteria that live in our gut, might also play a role
in processing arsenic.
In how our bodies handle arsenic.
Wow. So it's like this whole internal ecosystem
It is.
working to process this element. This raises another question. If our bodies are trying so hard to get rid of it, how does arsenic actually cause harm in the first place?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. And to be honest, scientists are still piecing together exactly how it all works.
Okay.
But one key thing is arsenic's affinity for sulfur.
Okay.
So you can imagine sulfur as like a crucial connector in our cellular machinery.
Okay.
And arsenic comes along and disrupts those connections, especially in proteins that need sulfur to function properly.
Yeah, so it's like arsenic is throwing a wrench into the delicate workings of our cells.
Exactly.
It's like sabotaging a machine by taking out some of its screws and bolts.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And the thing is, it doesn't stop there. Arsenic also interferes with phosphate. And phosphate, that's a vital part of the process that produces ATP, which is like our cell's primary energy source.
So not only is arsenic messing with our proteins, it's cutting off the power supply.
Pretty much, yeah.
No wonder it's considered so dangerous. But one of the things that I think people are most concerned about is the link between arsenic and cancer.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Your sources go into this connection pretty extensively.
They do. It's a complex relationship. Researchers have been studying it for decades, even in the early 20th century. Scientists were exploring its cancer-causing potential, and some of those first studies were...
What do they do?
Well, they applied arsenic compounds directly to the skin of animals.
Oh, wow.
Which, of course, often led to tumors.
Those early experiments sound a bit rough.
Yeah.
By today's standards.
Yeah, a little bit Frankensteinish. But they were important, They helped lay the groundwork for understanding
That's basic.
how arsenic could cause cancer.
Right.
But the research throughout those early years often gave mixed results.
Okay.
So it was really hard to draw solid conclusions back then. It wasn't really until the mid-20th century, with those big studies on workers exposed to high levels of arsenic.
And in factories and stuff?
Yeah, in industries like copper smelting and pesticide manufacturing, that the link between arsenic and lung cancer in humans became clearer. But even then, we still didn't really understand the mechanisms involved.
So it's still kind of a mystery?
It was.
So what were some of the big turning points in figuring this all out?
Well, one of the biggest was the development of much more sophisticated analytical techniques, which meant scientists could measure arsenic levels much more accurately, not just in the environment, but in human tissues as well. So this gave them a clearer picture of how people were being exposed and the levels of arsenic in different sources. And this led to a much better understanding of the real risks.
So basically better tools led to better data.
Exactly.
Which led to a more refined understanding of arsenic.
It did. And this opened up a whole new world of research. Scientists started to study arsenic's metabolism in much more detail, looking at its specific mechanisms of action at the cellular level and its long-term effects on different organs.
It's where the story of DMASV comes in.
Yes.
That's the metabolite we talked about earlier, the one that's found in some seafood.
Exactly. And, it seems that understanding these different metabolites is really key to understanding how arsenic interacts with our bodies.
So this focus on metabolites, along with all the advances in genetics and molecular biology, has allowed scientists to really dig deep and understand the mechanisms of arsenic, like how it causes DNA damage and oxidative stress.
Absolutely.
And how it messes with our signaling pathways and disrupts cell growth and death.
It's a whole cascade of effects.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's pretty amazing how science has progressed.
It is.
We've gone from those early crude experiments to this really nuanced understanding of how arsenic works at the molecular level.
Yeah.
So where does all this research leave us today?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that arsenic is a really complex element.
Okay.
It can cause harm, but it also has the potential to be beneficial. We've come a long way from just seeing it as a simple poison.
Right.
We now recognize that it plays a role in medicine and environmental science, even in cellular biology.
It's like arsenic has gone from being a one-dimensional villain to a much more complex character. It's got its dark side, but it also has some potentially redeeming qualities.
That's a great way to put it. But even though we've come a long way, there's still a lot we don't know.
Right.
Research is still ongoing. We're still trying to understand all the intricate details of its metabolism, how it works at a cellular level, and its long-term impact on our health.
So the arsenic saga is far from over.
Definitely not.
Well, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I wanted to touch on one more thing that your sources mentioned. It's a potential role of genetics in arsenic susceptibility.
Oh, right.
We've talked a lot about how arsenic affects our bodies.
Right.
But could our genes also play a role in determining how vulnerable we are to it?
It's a fascinating area of research, and it's getting more attention now. You know, we see that people can respond very differently to arsenic exposure. Some seem to be more resilient, while others are much more sensitive to its harmful effects.
Even at the same levels?
Even at similar exposure levels. So the question is, why?
Right.
And could our genes be part of the answer?
It does seem like genetics could play a role.
It does. And in fact, researchers have already found some specific genes that seem to influence how we metabolize arsenic.
Oh, really?
How efficiently our bodies eliminate it, and even how sensitive our cells are to its toxic effects.
Wow. So our genes could be shaping our individual destinies when it comes to arsenic.
To some extent, yes. And one gene that's been studied quite a lot is AS3MT.
The one that we talked about earlier.
The one involved in methylating arsenic.
Right.
And variations in this gene can actually affect how efficiently people convert arsenic into its different metabolites, which, as we've said, can have different levels of toxicity.
So it makes sense that different people would handle it differently.
Exactly. But AS3MT isn't the only gene involved.
Oh, so there are others?
Oh, yeah. Researchers are looking at other genes that are involved in all sorts of processes that arsenic disrupts, like DNA repair, oxidative stress response, even immune function. For instance, variations in genes involved in DNA repair could explain why some people are more prone to arsenic-induced cancers.
This is incredible. It's like personalized toxicology.
It is. Like, your genes could actually predict how your body is going to handle this element.
So how are we using this knowledge? Like, are we applying it in the real world at all yet?
It's early days, but it has the potential to revolutionize how we assess and manage arsenic risk. Imagine a future where you could get a genetic test that would tell you if you're particularly susceptible to arsenic. And that would allow for, more targeted interventions and preventative measures.
Oh, that would be incredible. Like personalized medicine for arsenic.
Exactly.
We can figure out who needs protection the most.
Exactly. And as our understanding of this grows, the genetic basis, we can develop even more effective strategies to reduce the health risks of arsenic, especially in those places with high levels of contamination.
It's almost like we're using what we know about arsenic to protect ourselves. It's like we're turning the tables on it.
It is a powerful reminder that science can be a force for good.
Even when dealing with something as dangerous as arsenic.
Even with arsenic.
Well, this deep dive has been quite a journey.
It has.
From the poison of kings to potentially life-saving treatments. We've gone from the depths of our cells to those vast landscapes that are contaminated with this element.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
We have. We've explored its history, its presence in our environment, how our bodies deal with it, and the ongoing scientific efforts to understand and control it.
It's been fascinating.
It has. And to our listeners, we'll leave you with this. Given its potential dangers and surprising benefits, what role will arsenic play in our future? It's something to think about as we try to navigate our relationship with this complex and unsettling element.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of arsenic.
Thanks for having me. It really is a fascinating question. And, scientists are still trying to figure out all the pieces of the puzzle. You know how arsenic actually works.
Right.
But one of the key things is that arsenic really likes sulfur. It has what we call an affinity for it. So you can think of sulfur as like a connector in all of our cellular machinery. And then arsenic comes along and it disrupts those connections, especially in proteins that rely on sulfur to work properly.
Oh, so it's like arsenic is throwing a wrench in the gears.
Exactly.
Messing up that delicate machinery of our cells.
Yeah, and it's kind of like sabotaging a machine by removing like crucial screws and bolts.
And it doesn't stop there, right?
No, it doesn't. Arsenic also interferes with phosphate, which, as you know, is a vital component in the process that produces ATP.
ATP, that's our cell's energy source.
Exactly. That's the primary energy source for our cells.
So not only is arsenic messing with those proteins, but it's cutting off the power supply.
Pretty much. Yeah.
No wonder it's so dangerous.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think really worries people is that link between arsenic and cancer.
Right.
And your sources really go into this.
Yeah, they do. It's a very complex relationship.
Yeah.
Researchers have been trying to figure it out for decades.
For decades?
Oh, yeah. Even back in the early 20th century.
Really? Wow.
Scientists were already looking into whether arsenic could cause cancer. And some of those early studies...
What'd they do?
Well, they applied arsenic compounds directly to the skin of animals.
Oh, wow.
And you can imagine what happened.
Yeah.
A lot of times it led to tumors.
Those early experiments sound kind of rough.
They do a little bit, yeah.
By today's standards?
A little bit Frankenstein-ish, but they were really important. They helped us understand...
the basics.
Yeah, the basics of arsenic and cancer. But the research back then often had these inconsistent results.
Okay.
So it was tough to say for sure what was going on. It really wasn't until the mid-20th century with those studies on workers exposed to arsenic.
Like in factories?
Yeah, like in copper smelting or pesticide manufacturing, that we started to see a clear link between arsenic and lung cancer in humans.
Lung cancer specifically?
Right. But even then, the exact mechanisms.
Like how it actually worked?
Yeah, that was still a mystery.
So how did we start to put the pieces together?
Well, one big thing was the development of more sophisticated analytical techniques.
Okay.
Which allowed us to measure those arsenic levels so much more precisely, not just in the environment, but in human tissues, too.
Oh, wow.
This gave us a much better picture of how people were being exposed and the levels of arsenic in different sources. And this led to a better understanding of those real-world risks.
So it sounds like better tools meant better data, which then led to a more refined understanding of arsenic.
It really did. It opened the door to a whole new wave of research. We could study arsenic's metabolism in more detail. Look at its mechanisms of action at the cellular level. And its long-term effects on different organ systems.
And that's where that DMASV comes in.
Exactly.
That's the metabolite we talked about earlier that's found in some seafood.
Yeah.
So it seems like those metabolites are key to understanding how arsenic affects us.
I think so. And this focus on metabolites, along with advances in genetics and molecular biology, has really allowed us to delve into those mechanisms, like how it causes DNA damage. Oxidative stress messes with those signaling pathways and throws off cell growth and death.
It's amazing how much progress science has made.
It really is.
You know, we've come so far from those early experiments to understanding arsenic at a molecular level.
Yeah.
So what are the key takeaways from all this research?
Well, I think the biggest one is that arsenic is not just a simple poison. It's this really multifaceted element.
Okay.
It can be harmful, but it also has the potential to be beneficial. And we've come a long way from just seeing it as this, you know, one-dimensional villain. We now know it plays roles in medicine, environmental science, even cellular biology.
It's like arsenic has gone from being just a bad guy to being this complex character.
Yeah, I like that.
With both dark and good qualities.
That's a good way to put it. And even though we've learned a lot, there's still so much we don't know. Research is still ongoing. We're still trying to unravel those intricate details, you know, of its metabolism, how it works in our cells, and its long-term impact on our health.
It really does sound like the arsenic story is not over yet.
It's definitely not.
Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on one more thing that your sources mentioned. It's the potential role of genetics in arsenic susceptibility.
Oh, right.
We've talked a lot about how arsenic affects us, but could our genes actually play a role in how vulnerable we are to it?
That's a really interesting area of research.
It is.
And it's definitely gaining more attention now. We see that people respond differently to arsenic exposure. Some people are more resilient.
Right.
Others are much more sensitive, even at similar levels of exposure.
Yeah.
So why is that?
Right.
Could our genes be part of the answer?
Yeah, it seems like they could be.
It does, doesn't it? And researchers have actually identified some specific genes that seem to affect how we metabolize arsenic, how efficiently our bodies eliminate it, and even how sensitive our cells are to those toxic effects.
Wow. So it sounds like our genes could be shaping our individual destinies when it comes to arsenic.
In a way, yes. And one gene that's been studied quite a lot is AS3MT.
That's the one we talked about earlier. Right?
Yeah, the one that's involved in methylating arsenic.
Right.
And variations in this gene can affect how efficiently we convert arsenic into those different metabolites, which we said can have varying levels of toxicity.
So different people would handle those metabolites differently.
Exactly. But, AS3MT isn't the only gene involved.
Oh, there are more.
Oh, yeah. Researchers are looking into other genes that are involved in all those processes that arsenic messes with, like DNA repair, oxidative stress response, even immune function. So, for instance, variations in the genes involved in DNA repair could be why some people are more prone to those arsenic-induced cancers.
This is fascinating. It's like personalized toxicology.
It is. It's like your genes can predict how your body's going to handle this element.
So are we using this knowledge in the real world at all yet?
Well, it's still early days, but it has the potential to revolutionize how we assess and manage arsenic risk. Imagine in the future getting a genetic test that could tell you how susceptible you are to arsenic's harmful effects.
Wow, that would be incredible. It would be like personalized medicine for arsenic.
Exactly.
We could figure out who needs protection the most.
Precisely. And as our understanding of this grows, the genetic side of things, we can develop even more effective strategies to reduce those health risks.
Right.
Especially for those who live in areas with high contamination.
It's almost like we're using what we're learning about arsenic to protect ourselves from it.
We're kind of turning the tables on it.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how science can be such a powerful force for good.
Yeah.
Even when dealing with something as dangerous as arsenic.
So this deep dive has been quite the journey.
It has.
We've gone from arsenic being the poison of kings to now potentially a life-saving treatment.
Yeah.
We've gone from looking at it inside ourselves to looking at these landscapes that are contaminated by it.
Right.
We've covered its history, how widespread it is, how our bodies deal with it, and those ongoing scientific efforts to understand it and control it.
Absolutely. It's been a fascinating journey.
And for our listeners out there, we'll leave you with this thought. Given all the potential dangers, but also those surprising benefits.
Right.
What role will arsenic ultimately play in our future? It's something to think about.
It is.
As we figure out our relationship with this element.
Yeah.
It's really complex and kind of unsettling element.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of arsenic.
It's been my pleasure.
It's amazing, isn't it? We keep digging deeper into the science, and arsenic just keeps getting more complex.
It really does.
Like a never-ending puzzle.
It is, yeah.
And speaking of scientific journeys, your sources actually touch on that a bit.
Yeah.
Like the history of arsenic research.
Right.
How our understanding of this element has changed over time.
Oh, yeah. That's a really fascinating story.
Yeah.
Filled with breakthroughs and a few controversies along the way.
I bet. So even back in the early 20th century, scientists were already exploring whether arsenic could cause cancer.
Yeah, they were.
What did they do back then?
Well, some of those first studies, they were applying arsenic compounds directly to the skin of animals.
Oh, wow.
Which, not surprisingly, often led to tumors.
Those early experiments sound a little intense.
They do, yeah.
Like something out of a Frankenstein movie. It's amazing how far we've come.
It really is.
Yeah.
But those early studies, crude as they might seem now, they were important. They laid the foundation for understanding.
So that was like step one.
Yes, step one in understanding arsenic and cancer.
Okay.
But a lot of the research throughout the early and mid-20th century, it had these inconsistent results.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it was hard to draw firm conclusions back then.
So it was a tough road for those early scientists trying to figure out arsenic.
It was. It really was.
So what were some of those turning points?
Well, one of the biggest was the development of more sophisticated tools for analysis. So scientists could measure arsenic levels more precisely in different environments and even in human tissues.
Oh, wow.
This gave them a much clearer picture of how people were being exposed and the levels of arsenic in different sources. And this led to, a much better understanding of those real-world risks.
So basically, better tools led to better data.
Exactly.
Which led to a more accurate understanding of arsenic.
Exactly. And this opened up a whole new avenue for research.
Okay.
Scientists could study arsenic's metabolism in more detail. Its specific mechanisms of action at the cellular level,
right,
and its long-term effects on different organs. In the late 20th century, researchers started to focus on those arsenic metabolites.
Right.
They realized that these different forms of arsenic could have different levels of toxicity and different effects on the body.
And that's where the story of DMASV comes back.
Yes.
And that metabolite that we talked about earlier. That's found in some seafood.
Exactly. It seems like understanding those metabolites is key to unraveling how arsenic interacts with us.
Right. So this focus on metabolites, along with those advances in genetics and molecular biology, has allowed scientists to dig even deeper into the mechanisms of arsenic. How it causes DNA damage, oxidative stress, how it messes with our signaling pathways, and how it disrupts cell growth and death.
Right. It really has opened up a whole new level of understanding.
It's incredible how science has helped us go from those early crude experiments
It is.
to now where we're understanding arsenic at a molecular level.
Yeah.
So what are some of the big takeaways from all of this research?
Well, I think the most important one is that arsenic is not just a simple poison.
Right.
It's this incredibly multifaceted element with the potential for harm, but also the potential for benefit. And, we've moved beyond just seeing it as this one-dimensional villain.
Right.
We recognize now that it has roles in medicine, in environmental science, even in cellular biology.
I think arsenic has gone from being just the bad guy to being this much more complex character.
Yeah, I like that.
With both dark and potentially good sides to it.
That's a great way to put it. And even with all the progress we've made, there's still so much more to learn.
Yeah.
Research is still going strong. We're still trying to unravel those very intricate details.
Well, now.
Its metabolism, how it works in our cells, its long-term effects on our health.
It sounds like the arsenic story is far from over.
It really is.
Well, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on one more thing that your sources mentioned briefly.
Sure.
It was the potential role of genetics
in
arsenic susceptibility.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked a lot about how arsenic affects our bodies, but could our genes actually play a role in how vulnerable we are to it?
It's a really interesting question.
It is.
And a fascinating area of research that's getting more and more attention.
Yeah.
We see that people can respond quite differently to arsenic exposure. Some people are more resilient.
Right.
And others are much more susceptible.
Yeah.
Even when they're exposed to similar levels. So the question is why?
Right. Why are some people more affected than others?
Exactly. And could our genes be part of the answer?
It seems like genetics could play a role.
It does, doesn't it? And in fact, researchers have already found some genes that seem to influence how we metabolize arsenic.
Oh, wow.
How efficiently our bodies get rid of it, and even how sensitive our cells are to those toxic effects.
Wow. So it's almost like our genes are shaping our individual destinies when it comes to arsenic.
To some extent, yeah. And one gene that's been studied quite a bit is AS3MT.
The one we talked about before.
The one that's involved in methylating arsenic.
Right.
Variations in that gene can affect how well people convert arsenic into those different metabolites.
Right, and those metabolites could have different levels of toxicity.
Exactly.
So it would make sense that different people would handle them differently.
Precisely. But AS3MT isn't the only gene involved.
Oh, so there are more.
Oh, yeah. Researchers are looking at genes that are involved in all those processes that arsenic disrupts, like DNA repair, oxidative stress response, even immune function. For instance, variations in genes involved in DNA repair could explain why some individuals are more prone to those arsenic-induced cancers.
This is incredible. It's like personalized toxicology.
It really is. It's like your genes can predict how your body's going to react to this element.
Are we using this knowledge yet? Like in the real world?
Well, it's still early, but it has the potential to revolutionize how we assess and manage arsenic risk.
Yeah.
Imagine in the future you could get a genetic test.
Oh, wow.
That could tell you if you're especially susceptible to arsenic's harmful effects. And that could lead to, more targeted interventions and preventive measures.
Wow, that would be amazing. Like personalized medicine for arsenic exposure.
Exactly.
We could figure out who needs the most protection.
Precisely. And as our understanding of this grows, the genetic side of things, we could develop even more effective strategies to reduce those health risks.
Especially in places with high levels of arsenic.
Exactly.
It's really amazing. It's like we're using our knowledge of arsenic to protect ourselves from it.
We are. We're turning the tables.
We are.
Yeah.
It's really a powerful reminder that science can be a force for good.
Absolutely.
Even when we're dealing with something as dangerous as arsenic.
It can. It's amazing what we can accomplish.
This deep dive has been a wild ride.
It has.
We started with arsenic as a poison fit for kings. And now we're talking about it as a potential life-saving treatment.
Yeah.
We've gone from exploring it deep inside ourselves to those vast landscapes that are contaminated with it.
It's been a really fascinating journey.
It really has. We've covered arsenic's long history, how widespread it is in our environment, the amazing ways our bodies try to deal with it.
Right.
And those ongoing efforts by scientists to understand it and manage it.
It's been a deep dive indeed.
It has. And to all our listeners out there, we'll leave you with this thought. Given all the dangers, but also the potential benefits of arsenic.
Right.
What role will it play in our future? It's something to really think about as we try to navigate our relationship with this complex and often unsettling element. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of arsenic.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.